Just explain the significance of the Confederate flag, first of all.
Well, the Confederate flag was designed when, in fact, it was South Carolina, the state that is the center of all this controversy was the first state to secede from the Union and began the Civil War. And it was designed for the Confederacy of the South, so the Southern Confederate states, which declared that they were going to be their own separate nation, and that was what began the Civil War in America in 1861. So, the 1860s, sorry. Anyway, 150 years ago, as you say, is when it ended. And the flag became, therefore, a symbol of the South, of the Southern American heritage and a way of life that we know now from things like Gone with the Wind, this kind of mythical version of, and actually quite nostalgic version of what the South in the antebellum era was like. What's happened now is that the Confederate flag gets flown in the southern U.S. and people think, oh, this is like my local flag. And some of the controversy is, I think, not dissimilar to some of the recent controversies about the St. George's Cross in England.
Yep.
And in fact, the Confederate flag was partly modeled on the St. George's Cross. It has the same red accent. The person who designed it actually wrote explicitly at the time that his idea for the flag was that it was on a white background as a symbol of white supremacy. And he says that explicitly. So it was designed as a white supremacist symbol. And the important thing to know about its flying in South Carolina right now is that it was not always flown in South Carolina in the Capitol building. It was actually first raised in 1962 as a defiant response to civil rights. It was actually flown as a white supremacist response to the attempt to integrate the schools and to integrate black people under the law more fully.
So flown in an intimidating...
In a totally intimidating way. It is, and a lot of people are saying it's a terrorist symbol, and I think there is a very strong argument to be made. I think it's no accident that, I mean, the word that Americans use to talk about this is segregation, because that's a slightly more acceptable word, and that's how we're taught to talk about it. But the word...
Well, what word would you use?
I would use the word apartheid. It was an apartheid. It is an apartheid symbol, and it was always about segregation. It was always about apartheid. It's not an accident that Dylann Roof was also photographed wearing a South African apartheid flag. This is a segregationist flag. It is a white supremacist flag. So when people say in the South, they say, oh, this is my heritage, and I'm just protecting my heritage and honoring my heritage. I'm from the North, so I have to say the heritage that you say you're protecting is a segregationist apartheid heritage.
But they see it as a symbol of freedom.
But, I mean, so would white apartheid South Africans. I mean, they would say the same thing. So I think that's the problem, is that once you start to honor that as, I mean, people have also on social media made the analogy with Nazi Germany, and usually that's a very illegitimate analogy. People tend to toss it around. But in this case, I think it's not unfair to say, can you imagine Germany saying, you know, there are people whose grandparents fought in World War II as Nazis and would say, okay, the Nazi flag represents that my grandfather died for this cause. That's basically the analogy. And are we actually saying that on our state buildings, our national government, or government buildings anyway, local government buildings, that we are willing to fly this flag that is about the systematic terrorization of a significant portion of our population, and that terrorism still goes on, as Dylann Roof has just demonstrated.
So in terms of the buildings in Charleston and elsewhere across the South, you say they should come down?
I absolutely do. I think Obama is 100% correct that they belong in a museum. It is a symbol of part of our past history, and therefore you don't eradicate it, but it should not be honored. It is not a heritage that we should be honoring.